We are choosing to relearn time-honored lessons the hard way.
We know more than ever before, but who knew bias was the bane of all you study? We know more than ever before, but who knew bias was the bane of all you study?
Many years ago, my wife was laid off, and it took about 6 months for her to find employment. Financially, we were fine. As a part of our normal, agreed upon financial life, we were able to make years of double payments for our mortgage before she was laid off. Not being able to make those double payments was one of a handful of things that we had to change financially until she found work. When it was all said and done, we had to cut a couple of fun things and lost the ability to get ahead in our mortgage for those 6 months of her being out of work, plus 2 more months of just stabilizing after she started working again. After that, it was business as usual. But during that period of unemployment, she got pretty depressed. She had never lost a job like that before. Back then, we were pretty devout religious people in our own way, and as we were taught socially through our religious community, when times got hard, you lean on God. I remember her struggling with that phrase, and honestly, I had to figure it out for myself as well. And the following is what I came up with back then as a religious man. I remembered a parable attributed to Jesus where he talks about the house that's built on a rock, a strong foundation, as opposed to a house built on sand. It's a simple story. Jesus explained that stormy weather comes and hits both houses, and the one that's built on sand is destroyed because it has no solid foundation. The most common interpretation of the story is that people who are mindful of God, in this case through the teachings of Jesus, can weather the storm of life, and it hits all houses no matter who you are. I explained to my wife that when times were good, the proverbial time of fair weather, we didn't just live within our means, we lived below them. There was no extravagant lifestyle. We drove sensible and reliable cars that we owned and maintained regularly. Beside the house, we had no debt. We even ate right and exercised, which helped with medical costs. Now, there's a New Testament scripture that says all wisdom comes from God. I attributed our prudent decisions about life to God, and the way I interpreted that parable that Jesus told was that actually performing some practical teachings of Jesus, like his warnings about loving money or other scriptures that address the vanity and pride that I still associate with commercialism, religion or no religion, that's what allowed us to keep the generally same standard of living though she was out of work. We were able to keep our head because we had been wise in the past. And all this was juxtaposed to how I have seen other religious people apply this concept. Essentially, they use cognitive dissonance to trick themselves into not caring about very grave circumstances, and in turn attribute that to God. In other words, they thank God for the mental strength to ignore the gravity of their situation until their circumstances change, if their circumstances change. Look, this video isn't about why I have a problem with religion that I do, but if I thought about it long enough, I could probably trace my issues with it to this concept. Anyway, the point of this video is the more well-known version of Jesus' parable, or at least when I was younger it was well known, and that is the story of the grasshopper and the ant. Have you heard it? Do you remember it? I'll put a link to a 5-minute version of the fable below. You'll see the images. Most people teach this story as a simple warning against laziness, but it's so much more than that. With the video refreshing my memory about the story, I was struck by how much of the fable teaches and assumes about society itself. In the version that was told to me when I was a kid, it was just dialogue between one grasshopper and one ant. In this video version, they show many ants working together, which makes sense given what actually happens in nature. Anyway, this particular version of the fable depicts the basic concept of work. Communities work. People work for what they need to survive. It may not be the meaning of life, but by not working, we deprive ourselves of the opportunity to ponder that meaning. Another thing that struck me was my reaction to the climax of the story. Sure, I knew it was coming because I knew the story, but to see the grasshopper denied by the ant based solely on holding the grasshopper accountable for his actions or inactions seems like such a foreign concept nowadays. There was a part of me that completely expected the ant to whip open the hatch one last time and bring out some food for the grasshopper to eat. Especially when they showed this facial expression on the ant as the grasshopper was walking away in the snow. Of course, if the filmmaker did that, it would empty the parable of its meaning. But I guess the filmmaker didn't want the ant to seem completely heartless. Anyway, I don't think it's irrational to see someone try to change this age-old cautionary tale by trying to explain why the grasshopper couldn't work or shouldn't work, or that someone can argue that the lesson is still learned by the grasshopper even if the ant shares food and shelter with the grasshopper. Let me end that debate right now. The lesson would not be learned. That's not how humans work. Honestly, what struck me the most about watching this animation after not thinking about the story for decades is how it doesn't represent United States culture, at least not its pop culture. The fact of the matter is, we have too many grasshoppers and people that want to be grasshoppers. I don't know how many grasshoppers we have, but I know we have too many. How do I know this? Because whenever the proverbial storms of life come, there are too many American citizens who are not prepared. Whether you're talking about the major public health issue of the past 2 years, or the current financial and energy crisis, this was filmed in 2022, and even socio-cultural economic crises, every single one of those life storms were made worse by the fact that people behaved like the grasshopper before the events happened. In fact, sometimes the storm is caused by the inaction of grasshoppers. Next, I have a saying about laziness. It used to be a real attention grabber when I was a part of that church I used to go to. I used to say there's no such thing as laziness. When most people think of that word lazy, they just think of a person who is not doing what they need to do. I mean, that's true. But instead, I framed it like this. What we call lazy is basically a person who doesn't understand the concept of priority. Some of the laziest people I've ever met, at least here in the United States, still manage to eat every day, sleep in a dry place, and even mate with someone. In other words, they had what they needed to survive and even propagate life. I've met supremely so-called lazy people who will camp out for hours and days for concert tickets or to see the latest Star Wars movie. So-called laziness is just having the priorities of a child while being adult age. Finally, the version of the fable in the link does have a happy ending, because the grasshopper not just learns the lesson, but survives long enough to apply it. What I want to know is, what will our American grasshoppers apply after the experiences of the last 2 years? Where will we be when the next storm hits? Did we learn anything? I'm Odium. This has been Message in a Bottle. Come back for the next reflection.
You study.